Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Are you guys glad it's the end of the week? I know I am. It's been a bit of a long week. So, how's everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing great. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About a live podcast where we talk about love, intimacy, and relationships and everything connected to that. So, my name is Tila. I'm a sex educator, relationship expert, and published author. I help people connect with their sexuality and connect with their partners in new and exciting ways. And it's all about keeping that romance alive, keeping that passion alive, and getting the most out of your sex life. So, this is an interactive podcast. Your comments, we broadcast live to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And your comments will come up in the video feed. So, in effort to build a fun and safe community here, please make sure that if somebody is asking a question or maybe they say something that you don't agree with, remember to be kind to each other. We want to have some meaningful dialogue, not just mudslinging that you often see on the internet. So yeah, let's get started. Hey Amanda, I am doing good. I'm a little tired today, but other than that, I'm doing good. So we're opening up the phone lines. If you want to call in with your thoughts or questions or comments, the number, of course, is toll free at 1-877-777-5589. If you want to call in and talk about a question or a comment that actually isn't related to today's show, that's totally fine. We can always come back to the topic of the day. It's important to me that everybody gets those questions answered. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I hear all kinds of questions all the time from people, and they're always worried about, oh my God, is it weird that I'm asking this? No, it is not weird. If you have a question, ask your question, okay? That's how is he going to get answers? All right, just checking to make sure all our feeds are up. It's looking good. Great. Okay, so today we are wrapping up our week-long theme of gender equality and sexism. And today sort of wrapping up on some concepts related to gender equality. And I sort of want to talk about why equality is important. Now, some people are like, well, what do you mean? Why is it important? Of course it's important. But if it was important to everybody, it wouldn't be constantly challenged all the time. And we often find that it is. So, I'm a firm believer that how we treat those who are considered at the bottom rung or, below the poverty line or the lowest, or however you want to look at societal hierarchies, how we treat people that are the most disadvantaged says a lot about us as a society and the health of our society. We should not be measuring our success by how well the people at the top are doing, but by how well the people at the bottom are doing. And this sort of goes into a bit of philosophy. Some people call it socialism. Other people, misunderstandingly, call it communism. I call it human decency. Everybody deserves the right to feel safe and secure and have water and food and shelter. Those are basic human rights. Unfortunately, not everybody gets them, but we can work on that, right? Just realized I forgot one of my microphones there. There we go. So a lot of people, when talking about equality, and I mean equality of any kind, not just gender equality, but equality of any kind, they start to be concerned that that actually means less rights for them. They were worried that somehow others being treated equally will somehow mean that they're going to have less. And the reality is that equality for people does not mean that you have less rights. In fact, you're going to have the same rights you pretty much always had, and there's actually a chance that you actually might get more rights. You might be able to do things that you were not able to do before, depending on where you sit in sort of the class hierarchy. And the reality is, and what people are really actually worried about, and I think that this isn't something that's talked about enough, is that the reality is people are worried about losing their privilege. That's scary for people. And it's scary because it means change, and change is scary. It's funny, the world changes constantly. Humanity is constantly changing. Our worlds constantly change all the time. And yet many people are uncomfortable or fear change. They don't know what the next step is going to look like, and they have all these worries and fears about what they think the next step will look like. And most often that's not usually the reality. When people often rail against the concept of equality, they're really saying that they're not willing to change, or they're not willing to give up the privilege that they have, or something along the lines of they're not willing to extend the same courtesy that they receive to others, or maybe even to think about their actions and how it would impact others. The thing about privilege is, unless you have listened to someone with less privilege than yourself, you probably don't realize the privilege that you have. And the reason being is that you've never had to experience those hardships. Why? Because your privilege has kept you from experiencing those hardships. And privilege, I think, is a difficult concept for a lot of people. Mostly because I think many people were taught growing up that privilege means wealth or money. And, it's tied to the idea that, someone whose privilege was well off, that they never experienced financial hardship, that they never experienced any hardship because they were super rich, and everything was sort of handed to them on a silver platter. That's not really true. I mean, yes, there are people who enjoy that type of privilege, but there are all kinds of privilege. Privilege does not mean, it is not defined by having money. It can be, privilege can be about gender, ethnicity, family structure. It can be about money. It can be about opportunities. It can be about so many different things. And someone who may enjoy privilege of one kind may lack privilege of another type. For example, I am a white woman, so I enjoy the privilege of being white. There are many hardships that I never experienced because of the color of my skin that other people have. I mean, we're seeing that a lot right now with Black Lives Matters. A lot of those voices are coming up, and some of the stories, those are things that I have never had to deal with because I am white. But that being said, I am a woman, so I do not have the same privilege that many men have. I have experienced being catcalled on the street. I have experienced feeling unsafe within a public space because of a group of aggressive men, and I didn't know what they were going to do. I have experienced those things. So privilege can be layered, and it often is. I mean, our world is not black and white. It is very layered. And it's only by listening to people from less privileged groups, or even just people from marginalized groups, that you come to understand and learn about your own privilege. So it's a difficult concept for people, because unless they've done that, or unless they've had a reason to do that, they often don't know. And it's that ignorance that causes many people to rebel against the statement that they have privilege, because they still see it as that silver spoon, everything handed to you on a silver platter. I read something really great this week, and it was talking about different types of privilege, and it basically said that if you have never had a Supreme Court case decide whether or not you as a group of people deserve the same rights as some other group, then you're privileged. which I thought was a pretty good, simple way for some people who may not understand to sort of get the concept, right? If you look throughout history, there are many, many legal battles. And even today, still very many legal battles of different marginalized groups fighting for legal rights. So privilege is real. For people who don't say that it is, please educate yourself. There's lots of really good information out there. Please don't expect someone of a marginalized group to explain it to you. They are not required to do that emotional labor. They do not owe you that emotional labor. There's so much out there, especially now, where there's a sort of big spotlight on Black Lives Matter. So there's a lot of more discussion about privilege. I'd encourage you to check out any and all of those resources and take some time to sort of think about that. The other thing is people tend to struggle with the notion of equality and privilege, because they sort of understand, or they sort of misunderstand what equality really means. And people tend to think of that equality just means treating everybody the same. Everybody gets the same thing. And if our world was much simpler, that would probably be true. But equality basically means that people will start out on the same level and have access to the same opportunities. Now, if you're like, well, isn't that the same thing as treating everybody equally? Not quite. Our world is more complex than that. And treating people the same going forward doesn't provide a level playing field. Not when you're counting generations of systematic inequality. Two people starting out in the same place doesn't mean that they've had the same advantages, right? So if you have someone who's experienced more privilege, whether it's due to ethnicity or due to their gender, and then you have someone else from a different group who had their past has included the same or different level of experiences, different level of access, putting them both on the same playing field and then being like, okay, you're starting out from the same place, you have access to the same opportunity, go. If it's a race, who's going to win? The person who starts out front. And you might be like, well, why are they starting out front? Well, there's still so many things that stand in the way of equality. Access to education, access to proper and secure housing, access to feeling safe, mental health supports. There's all these things that sort of feed into different layers. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but generational trauma and how trauma is passed in the genes. Well, when you have a marginalized group that has experienced generations of trauma and that is passed on, right? You're not really starting in the same place. It's not really treating people the same. The ironic thing is that to reach a place where we can treat everyone equally, we actually really need to treat every group individually to its specific needs in order to get there. If you have two people at two different levels, you need to bring this person up to hit to the same level, to hit the same starting point. Okay? It's not about giving everybody the same. It's about getting everybody to the same point. And that's sort of where we are, I think, in our history for a lot of different issues that relate to equality. And, we've acknowledged that things have not been equal in the past. So now it is really about starting to make those changes to provide more advantages to previously disadvantaged or marginalized groups in order to get them to the same playing field as everyone else. And this isn't going to happen overnight. It's probably not going to happen in one generation, I hate to say. When we look at the history of different groups, it may seem like, people may say, oh, well, women have been able to vote for this long, or slavery was abolished this long ago. But yes, there's still segregation. There's still limited access. Women were given the right to vote, but they weren't able to, access the same resources that men were given in terms of education, in terms of career opportunities. Even is not as is a lot closer in our history than most people realize. Up to only a few generations. There are some people that women being unable to vote, or segregated communities, that is in living memory. There's still people who are alive who remember a time where this was not a thing. Right? So it may feel like a long time ago, but it's not. It's not long enough to actually make the changes that are necessary. Does that make sense? Anybody have any thoughts on that or anything I've said so far? No? All right, so moving towards equality, and speaking more specifically about gender, is a complex issue, mostly because there's a lot of different ways that gender inequality still happens. And this is even just referring to the gender binary, not even considering people of other genders outside the binary. There's so much more work to do. I mean, if you look at certain areas of the States, as well as in Canada, people who are trans still struggle for a lot of their legal rights. People who are trans can be fired, they can lose their home, they can be evicted without cause, that sort of thing. Some people won't be able to rent if their landlords know that they're trans. So there's a lot of work to be done, not just legally, but also socially, in terms of understanding that people are people and that we are all the same. I mean, if you look at speaking of trans and trans rights, at the ridiculous debate over the bathrooms that was last year and has sort of popped up again, with, I'm sure many of you have read about or heard about the blog published on J.K. Rowling's website regarding her issues. I'm not going to rehash that here. If you are looking for more information about that, I have published on my social media channels on Facebook and Twitter, and not so much on Instagram, because Instagram is terrible for links. But on Facebook and Twitter for sure, there's some links to discuss some of the allegations that J.K. Rowling has raised. I also shared a YouTube video. It's entitled "Sue Gives a Fuck," and it's an open letter response to J.K. Rowling. I highly encourage you guys to watch that. I think that Sue sums it up quite succinctly, and I think that as a trans woman, much better person to speak about that than myself. So I'd highly recommend you checking out that video. It's very informative, a very well-reasoned argument, and fantastic. So please do check that out and give that channel a follow, because, she's pretty great. Or they are pretty great. Sorry, I'm not sure about pronouns. Anyway, but yeah, so there's lots of work to be done in terms of equality, and it is going to be different for each gender, and it's also going to be different in each area. So unfortunately, there's no simple solution. I know that in recent years there's been more concern about, we've been focusing a lot on encouraging young girls, and now young girls are doing better, but the boys are being left behind. It is important that we make sure that we don't swing the pendulum too much in one direction. We should not be ignoring one group for the needs of another, to be sure. However, academically, there's different issues at play. I personally believe that our education system is challenging, not just because of gender, but because of different learning types. Our education system only caters to one specific learning type. Boys tend to have a different learning type than girls, typically speaking, as a generalization. And of course, individuals also have different learning types. So if it doesn't match the school structure, it's usually problematic and people don't tend to do as well. So once again, there's different types of privilege layered within privilege there. So, I wish I had a simple and easy answer for how we can move more towards gender equality, but my main message there is just that we need to treat each group individually based on where they're at today and where we want to get them to tomorrow. And that, like I said, is probably not going to be easy because everybody has different ideas about the subject. So, gender equality is something we should definitely strive for, but it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get there. In terms of, in recent years, I know there's been quite a bit of talking about pay gaps between genders. Some people firmly believe that a pay gap doesn't exist because they've never seen it and they don't know, or it doesn't exist where they work, so they think it doesn't exist anywhere. It's true that certain industries have taken a lot more steps towards eliminating pay gaps, which is fantastic. There are still some industries where it is painfully obvious. So not only do we have to address that differences from different areas and different genders, but also different industries in some cases in different areas of the world. All we can really do, I think, is work on our area of the world, our sphere of influence, because social change is really about individuals. It's about individual voices. It is about individual voices coming together and saying, no, we're not doing that this way anymore. And we're seeing that a lot lately, and we have seen it, I think, in the last few years with the different movements and things that have come up. I do think it is some people would say it's a horrible, social media has been a horrible thing and has been dividing people. I think that social media, in some senses, like anything, it can be good or bad. But I do think that a lot of social changes that we're seeing are because of conversations and information and things that are shared and conversations that are happening on social media that were never happening in real life, and probably in some cases still don't happen in real life. But it's giving a platform and a voice for different issues to be discussed, which is really important. And I think that's how we've seen some of, for example, the power of the Me Too movement that started as a hashtag on social media and became a global phenomenon. We look at things very differently now, post Me Too. Things are different, and that is good. It's change. It's change that's driven by conversation. So our sphere of influence is really important, and we can't give up on those issues. We can't give up on trying to do the right thing. I know it can be kind of exhausting sometimes, and definitely it's important that you take care of yourself, but I think that each person needs to realize that they have more power than they realize. Your voice matters. How you respond to things matters. How you don't respond to things matters even more. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Silence favors the oppressor. Silence favors the status quo. So when we're talking about moving towards gender equality, being silent in the face of sexism, being silent in the face of oppression is not going to help us get there. We need to speak out against those things. We need to acknowledge that they're wrong, and we need to take steps in order to prevent that from happening in the future. How's everybody doing? I know it's kind of a heavy subject. I don't know where my mouse is. There it is. How are we doing? Anybody have any thoughts? Any things they want to pitch in? No. And I always talk about such heavy subjects. People are like, I need time to process. It's so much I need time to process. And that's okay. Time to process is good. It's all about conversations, and in a lot of cases, it starts with thinking about things. It's always good to take some time to think about things and analyze how you feel about things, learn about things. It's an important step. That's sort of all I wanted to chat about for gender equality. I know we've done some shorter episodes this week. I apologize. As I mentioned last week, I've been moving, so things have been a little hectic for me. Which leads me to my final thoughts. So, this is actually episode number 25. Woo, 25! So we've done 5 weeks of 5 days in a row. And that's a lot. Doing live 5 days a week is quite a commitment. And I was hoping we'd have a few more callers, but I understand the nature of things, and sometimes people don't want to interrupt the topics, or they don't know what to say, which is fine. But I have made the decision that effective next week, instead of going 5 days a week, I'm going to drop to 1 day a week. And after some feedback from people who listen and people who download and so on and so forth, we're going to set the day for Tuesdays. So it's going to be Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. Still going to be broadcasting live to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. I will be updating all that information after this episode or this weekend. So just so you know, I really appreciate everybody who's been tuning in every day. That support means a lot. And thank you guys so much. And I hope you continue to tune in on Tuesdays. And we might change up the format of the episode a little bit as well, to incorporate some different and other elements and make it a little bit more, hopefully, interactive and fun. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you guys want to check out more, please check out my website, exploresextalk.com. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday. That's June 23rd at 8 p.m. Pacific or 11 p.m. Eastern. Everybody have a fantastic weekend and stay safe.